So last night I was chatting to a couple of people and we were talking about the talking about the event series spreadsheet that we were inputting yesterday. And it did cross my mind that there are a lot of catalogues already that exist that we can use for free with codes to make this machine readable. So essentially what we did yesterday in our exercise was we made our own catalogues from scratch of addresses and people and organisations. So just to make everybody aware that Sea Data is a European catalogue, but there are entries in there of non-European organisations and people. So that might be something just to be aware of, that if we, because I spoke to Adam as well, and if we include the URL to these records in the spreadsheet, then it doesn't break his code to do whatever fancy stuff he wants to do. So what I'm doing at the moment is just collating a list of all the relevant catalogues that we might need for each of those fields into another spreadsheet, but it looks nice, don't worry, it's not hard. Just so people can have a browse through these catalogues and see if their organisations exist. If they don't, all you need to do is email the help desk or me, and we can get those added. So then you have an online code for your organisation or your project. So, for example, when we were going through the time series, like your time series name could be in EDMA, which is a catalogue of programs. It could also be in EDIOS, which is a catalogue of observing systems. So there are two possibilities there. And then your time series organizer, we talked about ORCIDs, but you could have an ORCID or a RAW or an ocean expert ID. So it doesn't matter which one of those, if you have any of those, just use that. So we don't also need to stick to just one catalogue in these tabs. In these fields, you can use whichever catalogue you have or fits. And then for funders, we can use EDMO, which is the marine organisations, and monetary grants. So NERC, Atlantis, CLASS, or whatever, normally go into EDMA, which are programs as well. So most of these projects and programs will have codes in catalogues already. When we get down to the dataset level, Sea DataNet has the EDMED, which is the environmental dataset number. So you can create an EDMED record per dataset, or if you have a collection of datasets under one project, they can go in there as well. So then we get to the data download option, which I think is a field in our event series spreadsheet, and that's where we can use the DOIs or the PIDs that we have for the exact data level. So I just wanted to remind everyone that these exist, and it will make our lives much easier if we start using codes now rather than free text, where people are spelling things differently, people have different slang words for things and different spellings. And I just think if we go forward using these codes, our lives will be easier in the future when we continue the development. Does anybody have any questions? Was that clear? Justin?
So many of these catalogues, each of the they already have exposure to schema the board, which is already going across coders as well. So by using these catalogues, you're actually getting some of the metadata across. There's already there automatically. You're actually finding this metadata that's working.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, they're already interoperable, and that's exactly what we need.
Just reiterate where we find your catalog of catalogs. Is it in that participant folder?
I've not put it in yet, but
Okay.
I will. And if you want to have a browse now, go to the Sea DataNet, just Google Sea DataNet metadata, and this page comes up, and you can have a look through the catalogs that are there. There's also CDIs and other things, CSR, cruise summary reports. Your cruises that you have had for your time series might already be in there. They will have codes as well, so it might be just good to familiarise yourself with any of your codes and programs have already had entries into these catalogs, because they might well be there already.
If they're not there, how do we proceed with it?
I would say just let me know, and I know who's in charge of each one, and we can see what we can do.
So I was going to start with something relatively simple, but now we have a discussion starting for it. So our Otis recommendations is that things like Sea DataNet's catalogs, they're good, they're great, but this is where the governance comes in, right? if you create those entries in a European system, you have to be mindful that it is governed by people who run the European system and their capacities and their funding cycle. CDataNet has been stable for a long time, so pretty good. But our general recommendation is make sure that you have the control you need over your records at source. So for example, the Pacific Data Hub that you, some of our colleagues have just contacted, if you're a Pacific entity, it may be best to use the one closest to you, again, ensuring that they're an Otis node and you can reuse that. Nothing prevents you from creating another copy in a European catalog, but we don't want to enter the stage of catalog competition for who's registering with us. That's the same thing that happened with ROAR and DataSite and ORCID. And right now it's still relatively open, but it could again become a capture situation. So redundancy is not bad if it's planned, right? So keep that in mind. Again, nothing to say that the services of CDataNet are not fine, but again, if they go down, and I think they are down at the moment as Otis nodes, I'm just checking that. They will fix it probably, but again, it's hard to be sure. So my recommendation is yes, these are great things to have. They may make your life easier, but then you're also subject to the management and the governance of another system, which you may not be, let's say, have the right level of control over. Right now, we're collegiate, which is a sort of scientific community, but as we all know, some of those things can change even beyond our control. So do keep that in mind. I'm just double checking. Edmerp is back online. Edmo is still offline at the moment as a notice node. It's the dashboard. I'm sure they'll fix it. But again, as this community develops, I would encourage redundancy that your regional, something under your governance and data sovereignty norms, you have an Otis node there that will be the authoritative source for the metadata of your time series. And you can echo that data, which is a good idea, just in case one of those things goes down. You can echo it in things like Edmerp or Edmo, etc. The ideal scenario is that you don't have to register it twice. They can pick up the JSON-LD schema that you're producing from your authoritative node and create a backup copy in there. So that would be the most efficient way, so you don't actually have to do any further work. This group made a lot of progress. Well, Adam, myself, Justin, were talking about it. We're quite impressed with the amount of progress that has been made. So we have event series, we have places with coordinates, we have grants, etc. Again, if any of those things pop up on a node that you trust and is under your Otis governance, you can use this ID field at the very beginning to simply link to the page that has the JSON-LD, and then Otis will harvest it from them, right? So then you don't have to fill anything out. That's the idea. But we thought, hey, you're doing very, very well. Why not push it a little bit and say, let's actually talk about some data sets. So we made a data set tab and a data download tab. The data set tab is just like you did before, but of course, we know that you don't want all your data sets, you don't have capacity to fill that in manually. That's a bad idea. That's the programmatic thing. Later on, we'll do it. However, many of your time series have like a synthesis data product, like, the last 10 years of HOTS data. Here's a summary, like a big flagship data product. So if you have one or two of those, it's worth giving it a shot, just filling out the information of that data set, nothing very spectacular there. And this field, recorded at, is where you link the data set to the event that it was recorded at. That could be an individual cruise, or if it's a multi-year, multi-cruise synthesis overview data product, you can link it to the event series itself, right? Give the idea of the event series and saying this was recorded at POPS, the event series, or that's the event series. Worth a shot, and that's again how you get people to look at the data sets that you want them to know about, like the key ones, maybe the most recent ones. If you want, there's a field citation, where it's not the citation of the data set. Those are citations like papers or anything that you think are especially useful to the person who's looking at that data set. So please look at these papers too. I will point to another field, which is quite important. This distribution. The distribution field, the data set, metadata object can take people to, let's say, the landing page of your data set. In the distribution, you fill it out with this data download type, right? So you fill that in and link it to the distribution. And that's the link where I can just download the data. No landing page, nothing like that. I hit that link, I should be able to pull the data right away in a certain format. So here you just express, what is it? How big is it? where is it and what kind of encoding? Is it NetCDF? Is it XML, etc.? There are comments on it which will take you to a list of types of data types where you can find the right thing to put in there, right? I gave an example with NetCDF. Try it out with a couple. One data set can have many distributions. So if I have a data set, but I serve it in NetCDF, Parquet, and ZAR, I just fill in 3 rows for the distribution, saying you can get this data set in different formats from my servers. If there's only one, there's only one, not to worry. Yeah. So for those of you who do have those, worth a shot, very easy to link it to your event series or event. And then if you have a direct download, you can fill that in. If you don't, it's fine just to point to the landing page where you can get that data set. Again, let's not be too granular with this. We don't need like individual ones, but if you have big flagship data products that you're interested in. For the granular stuff, that's where the data hubs like Nicotimo or others come in. They probably will have granular entries that you can point out or we can link automatically. Yeah, so just a little thing for you to complete this exercise because we made great progress. And as Adam has showed in his code, it's already visible. It can be very quickly already visible because the machines understand it well. That's it.
Here.
Yeah.
Hang on for a sec. Yesterday we were talking about ways to get, so I think this solves the desire to get your parameters, your variables into Otis for discovery. And
Not very much, it is.
the desire to push out the variables was what my understanding was led to this exemplar or representative data set. But some of these folks may or may not have some synthesis product that encompasses all of the data that they would like to present. So when Adam and I initially started talking, we were talking about a hypothetical data set that could be put in there. There would not be a data download for such a thing, but they could make a hypothetical that represents their entire data holdings. Is that a fair statement?
I wouldn't put it in anything there that doesn't exist. This would only be for those who want to share a data set that they have,
Okay.
a compilation. And then others can see that as an example. But I think when we get into so we've set ourselves up right now. I mean, if we had a few more days in the workshop, we could then go into the variables, right? And share the variables in detail, linking to learn vocabularies or whatever. But we don't have time to do that. But what we have done here is create the initial connection. And now you understand the model of how to manage your data and metadata such that extending to variables is just another couple of tabs, right? It's not that scary anymore. Okay. We can do that maybe in an online meeting after this, since we've done it. We can do a small online meeting where we just take that next step. But you know, when we get to that level, that's more something for you to understand, take back to your tech teams and your various time series stations, and implement something automated, right? Because you don't want to sit there filling out hundreds of thousands of data sets, right?
Just to link to that third, especially so there, I think two types to consider one within data sets, it's under variable measure, but then it has to exist. I think if it doesn't exist, then it can mean to event under action, but that's then a whole different story. I mean, you can have the action event already measuring something,
Right.
which is not in the data set, but that would be
Yeah.
under action within the event, not under data set.
Yeah, the action don't happen and no data sets there. That's true. That would be another tab for action.
Yeah. That would be another way.
But at the moment, there's no way for them at a highest level to share out their total variables collected at the event series.
Under event action, there's without the data set.
Without, okay,
But that's not linked to the data set, that's then linked to the event itself.
Okay.
To an action.
okay,
Because in
Yeah.
the action, you would say something with the metadata, like, we measured this property. Yeah, it's not a variable yet, it's a property of the ocean. When it gets packaged into a data set, it goes into the data world, right? You could say that without having a data set. You can say, in fact, remember we talked about with the event series and events, you have this thing called offers, right? Like, what do you offer? We could use that to list the things you typically measure. Like we offer nitrate measurements, phosphate measurements, etc.
yeah.
That could be a way to just link it to the event series in toto.
So I think that was the desired impact, the desired outcome.
So we have to follow up, and that will take couple of hours or less just to get to understand it and to fill it in. And then we can do it at the event level, so we don't have to worry about filling in individual data sets. You can just say, my time series offers measurements of the following time.
That's
Right.
perfect.
And then we can query like in the graph, when a machine or human is querying it, say, hey, is there any organization or any event series that measures these parameters? They'll find you.
Also the event level. We do that very like you could actually link the action to the data set.
Yeah, again, that's where we would cross the sort of automated linking catalogs, etc., right? So that would require every time series organization to get their data in order, such that they can be automatically quickly projected. For those of you with databases, that shouldn't be that hard. For those of you who are still managing it in sort of in a fragmented way, that will take some bookkeeping to get to that stage.
Going back, links to the data set, those would be, for example, a link that can be generated, if you have your data on Verda, there is a way of generating access to certain data service to that data set as a URL. Is that the type of link that?
Exactly. So for example, some apps or other servers, you do an API call, you say, give me the data in this format, and then they will in real time produce it. You can put that as a link in the content URL so that it will trigger the API, right? So be a bit wary because, you know, in the age of trawlers and LLMs, you don't want people triggering those services all the time automatically, right? You might get an overflow. So sometimes, you know, you can restrain yourself with that, but it's up to you.
But I'm also wondering if you, for example, we have CSV table with water quality data from the time series and the GitHub. Repo that is over. Link to that table would also be useful.
If it's data, you know, just say it's CSV as the encoding type, and then point to the raw GitHub file, not the GitHub landing page, but the raw file. That's fine. Whatever the data is, wherever it is, this is the point of the metadata, just to help things find it, no matter where it is or who hosts it. But maybe Danny, we can put that into the notes for the follow-up actions.
I got it.
In the event, that was a nice clarification from Nico, that we can do it there, even before we start getting into the granularity of data set, we can already say at the event.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. I got it. Thanks for that.
Other time series that we know exist that are in this room. We'll be able to do our search.
Yes, I think we can do that. I think there are people who wanted to be here. Some of them were on time series cruises,
Yeah,
and that's why they couldn't be here. So I think there's gonna be a need for some level of virtual capacity building to help make that happen, because they weren't here. But this was all recorded, and I think that we could just do an hour at a time of small group work and probably make a little bit of progress as we go. And bring people who aren't here into the fold.
Yeah, I mean, it's not NSF funded, but I work a lot with some of the fishery surveys and they collect, you know, like the state and regional fishery surveys that collect an incredible amount of oceanographic data. Not just, you know, the fish abundances, but also temperature, salinity, fluorescence, things like that. And so those time series run regularly involving those, so involving those fisheries organizations might be something to be done with.
So let's start with group one. We have Bruno and Josh, were the leader and note taker. I don't know which one of you, or if Todd's been volunteered to come on up.
Well, yeah.
Do you want me to bring the note?
No. They volunteered me because so I know what I said. So, all right, so we came up with a possible solution to address 3 problems. First problem is, as we've seen just here in this room, having a person experienced in these metadata formats and the rules and how to work with them is super helpful. And the second problem is, the average scientist in the field is super busy, and then I've never heard in my career someone complain, I'm bored, I need something to do today. And the third problem is it's too easy to just get an email and ignore it or hit delete. So we came up with the idea of a data diplomat. And the data diplomat comes and helps the two parties interact and discuss with each other. And they would come to an institute, ideally give a seminar to say, this is who I am, this is what we're doing, here's an example of what we can do with this. And then they go and meet with the individual researchers, the plankton people, the chemists, the physical, and get at first a basic subset of metadata just so we can get this rolling. And they work with the person, they know which column to do and which pull down and which catalog and stuff to do because the data diplomat has been trained by a data manager. And they work with these people, and by the time they leave, the institute has a face and a person that they know they can trust and work with. That person should have basic metadata that they can come back and put in the system. And there's an interaction there, and it helps them not fear some strange email from a data person. In terms of what this person would be, this would be a really great capacity development early career opportunity. An early career person could get a chance to travel to this institute, to meet people, and to also learn the parameters. They may have a background in chemistry, but they learn, you know, the other parts by working on the metadata. And okay, so yeah, so the focus is on metadata in this initial stage. And the stuff they collect can then be put into some kind of a interface or tool that they show to the next group, and it gets bigger and better. The idea is to approach this through a larger organization like IOC to give it an identity, international identity, and IOC UNESCO already has these groups like Goose, IOS, and Otis and Obis. And it would help with that.
Todd, you suggested that ignorance would be.
Oh, yeah. IGMETS was an IOC UNESCO project, and IGMETS is the international group for marine ecological time series. It already has been around to a good chunk of the community. It has an example product. If we could reinvigorate that and use that as the identity of this effort, because there are already a lot of people who already know that exists, and it'll encourage participation. I think the three key things though are, we have this person who speaks data and goes out and meets people face to face. It would also be super helpful if, you know, if we could do it, have the person speak the language of the institute they're visiting. It's hard enough to understand some of these metadata terms, but then to also have to be translating from your non-native language adds another layer of complexity. I think it would be a really great capacity building and diplomacy experience. I think the group ended with, we're going to try to reach out to IOC UNESCO and figure out how we can pursue this.
3 key pieces. Said the person who speaks data. So there are 3 key pieces.
Yes.
To this.
European level, you could try cost. It's one of their actions. They use it to move it around. Because what we're talking about sounds like a short-term scientific mission. And then in Europe, we've got cost funding, which does that type of work.
Can we put that in the cost?
I think it's a great idea. Like, in fact, we call, like, you know, from IOGE, we ask people to do this to share digital capacity across different things. So yeah, the facilitation, like a true data scientist in the sense they know the domain, they understand data informatics, and they understand a bit of analytics, and those people can really help. In Helmholtz, we actually have for our AI branch, they have a floating pool of consultants that they just sort of deploy to different Helmholtz centers that need help, right? So I think it's something similar like that, where we create a pool of these people that can be moved around or called or summoned. we do have that Ocean Decade program, Ocean Data 2030, right? Which we're warming up as we release the implementation plan for the last 5 years. I think this would be the mechanism that would be right here. So that all of these people who want to offer support to different programs and actions and initiatives in the decade or outside of it can identify themselves there, and then we can do some of the overhead of the administration of creating their profiles, creating an index of these experts. So we can help with that. I would always, just a small thing, but I understand the intent, but I would shy away from calling them data diplomats, because that is actually a job, right? Which is, diplomacy, actual diplomacy. So we can call them something else, but
Well. Yeah, in IMBER, IMBER, they had this role of a data scientist who spoke the science and the data side of it. The thing about diplomacy is there are some people who are, as long as it's not an offensive term, I think it's still, this negotiation and between the two different worlds. The data and the science aren't always overlapping.
Group 4 called it a data broker.
well, a data broker is a particular kind of service, like Velde is a data broker, right? So they're not brokering any data. They're not like a stockbroker. They're also not diplomats in the sense they're not preventing war, right? So, these, as the reason that we're getting kind of picky, because as the decade is bringing science and policy together, it's not offensive, but it's confusing, right? Because it's like, that's not actually, diplomacy is not actually your function. It's facilitation, it's something like.
Is liaison an okay word?
That's neutral, I think, yeah.
No, I used to have data liaisons. They got rid of the role. So another thing that came up here is BODC has a very, or in the past, I think still has a really good success rate because they used to send a data manager out on the cruises. This person would collect with them and eat with them and be on the ship with them and be a face, and it would be hard to say no to them, afterwards.
I would think at this stage, just getting it down and trying to explore it and not worry about the semantics of the name is
Yeah.
probably more important than feeling out what's possible and where, then maybe the name can.
I would agree until somebody announces it and then it's a thing, and then all of a sudden everyone's confused. So semantics first sometimes does help.
I'd like to add too, I think one of the things we talked about is it's probably, this effort will probably be pretty easy, right, for everyone in the room, within Europe, within, North America, but the goal of this would also be to target a lot of these smaller time series that might be only known within institutions, and haven't traditionally been connected to kind of the global international, global scientific community. And so I think a lot of work with this would be very beneficial to have be done outside of Europe, outside of North America, for these smaller time series that.
And as a data manager that's good to see, I strongly support this idea. I think it's really good. And it doesn't need to be as extravagant as going to see. It can just start with making initial contact at the beginning of the project. That's the most crucial time. And have your data person involved from the very beginning. And then the dialogue starts and everyone gets to know each other. The data person is a human, not just someone emailing all the time and nagging the data management plans. That makes a huge difference, and it really makes everybody much more productive. And the understanding of metadata and what's required is very from the beginning. Because I see so many times when it gets to the end, the data is collected and the scientist says, well, where do I put it now? And they're panicking and it's stressful and everybody's unhappy. So just starting from the beginning and be the first step.
I think the face, seeing a person's face immediately really helps.
And the last point I think we spent a good time talking about was there needs to be some clear immediate benefit for the PIs to participate in this process. It can't just be only a vague kind of promise of, well, in the future, people might, interact with you more. So we thought maybe a paper or something where they can immediately get co-authorship on a paper that comes out of this, or some other, think more carefully about short-term benefits that we can sell and convince people to engage with.
Just on that point, setting the data people, make them suffer a bit, you know, in the Arctic or wherever you send them. It's worth it too, because it works both ways. They also then realize it's impossible to collect this in the field or in the lab. We have to find a way to capture that asynchronously, automated, etc. So seeing the reality of the sampling process also helps the design of better tooling and better approaches that can, so it's a mutual exchange there.
In my career, I think one of my biggest growth points was when I started talking to scientists and realizing the caveats and biases of their method and what you have to watch out for. And if you're just a data person and you're not, you know, why can't you fit in this form, this spreadsheet or whatever? It, you know, it works for CTD people. I want to work for like people. All right. So. Yeah.
Nice work.
Yeah, we got a very nice outline summary with sub bullet points and sub bullet points, so I'm not gonna go through all of them. I think we talked a bit about the same issue, so I'm not gonna repeat this bit, but we've also talked a bit broader about sort of the challenges we're facing. Which is, well, one thing is, was about the communication that this workshop has been great, but it would be good if we have sort of a way to continue this on, and not just every couple of years, everyone meets and see where we're going, but sort of find a way to keep this going. And some ideas were that we could have sort of a monthly or whatever frequency virtual water cooler where we would meet online, sort of exchange forever. Not that you have to attend every single time, but just kind of keep touch base, see what happens. But also the idea of a sort of setting up a sort of program where we would exchange sites or technicians between the different time series, which I think would be very beneficial for especially the smaller ones that have been doing it sort of based on what they think is best practice, but you might learn from each other, especially from the ones that have a bit more of a developed system, bigger groups, also more exchange and ideas. Then the next challenge is we spend a lot of time talking about how to keep these time series funded, which I think is what all the challenges we're all facing, not only the smaller ones, but also the bigger ones. And sort of thinking, could we convey the value of a time series to the broader public? Because it's one thing to say, well, we're collecting data, it's all about quantifying changes in ocean chemistry over time, but what does that mean for the person in the street or the politician? Do they really care? Especially nowadays in the US, but they won't care about ocean acidification per se, but they might care if they would know more. And sort of using the time series and the stuff we're doing as a platform to support ocean literacy, have people either join in person, have people on the ship, which I think is what Kim has been doing a long time with Bermuda. A lot of the people that were joining were actually people from the general public that joined mostly to watch birds, but at least they were up to speed with what they were doing. And then there were examples from Plymouth where they had virtual reality tours, that people would come and put on virtual goggles and walk through the data. And so the idea is if we could excite the kids, excite the adults, maybe we get a bit more traction more globally. A follow-up on that was that probably, possibly, that maybe the current funding model of these short-term 3-5 year contracts or projects isn't very sustainable in the long run. Then we might have to think a bit more outside of the box on how we could sort of get a different way of funding, maybe get core funding. Which is,
you know, we've been organising this stuff and organising us to come together these meetings, and if that's not going to continue or your future is uncertain or actually finishing, then we need to identify a mechanism for pushing that forward. And I guess at the very basic level, following on, you need someone who will say, look, we're going to be doing it at this time every month, and here's the Zoom link and whatever, come in, and then start identifying what the tutorial needs are. So this month we're going to be focusing on this chunk of the metadata, and so set up a Zoom, and those who want to come in. But that requires a sort of a coordination person or a coordination body? And I'm not quite sure if you have some ideas, Heather, of where that might sit going forward.
The visibility is because of this meeting, then we can be stronger, that we can be recognized in higher levels. For each individual is difficult. We are all together with these ideas, then we can get more.
You know, we've worked with IOC, UNESCO, we've worked with IOCCP, International Ocean Carbon Coordination Project. And as far as I know, they're stable and pushing forward, and there's a time series, a dedicated time series person. The way their science steering group is set up is that they have ocean experts in different areas. And I believe, Nico, are you the time series person?
I don't. It's Aiden, it used to be Aiden, and then she got co-chair now, so but it's since that time, it's
Every 4 years.
One of the things I might add is really a group can be self-organizing. You just need to have a few people that are going to take responsibility for setting up the meeting and making sure that if they need to rotate off, that there's somebody else there to replace them. And the responsibility of who's responsible for the video teleconferences has floated around quite a bit. The big thing is you just sort of need to buy in of, okay, you know, here's the list. One of the I'm not saying this would be necessarily the right place for it, but the Earth Science Information Partnership, ESIP, has a bunch of what they call clusters, and they provide, the video conferencing, web space, places to sort of manage those types of things. They also have actually ESIP fellows that are late stage graduate students or early stage. I think they're mostly graduate students that are actually funded to help facilitate the cluster group. I mean, a time series cluster would make perfect sense to me, but there may be other organizations that are better matched for the marine community.
Well, I've attended some of their,
They have
the bio cluster and marine cluster.
They have a
meetings.
marine cluster already.
Yeah,
But it's
very
usually,
focused on.
it's the data people. I don't know if we could have enough to attract. But it does provide a foundation for the logistics, like John was saying.
For ESIP, I was the chair of their semantic, the semantics group, and inside that there was like semantics harmonization, etc. So it is very data focused, but what we did at one stage, science on schema.org, where Otis got a lot of its inspiration to build its schema.org thing. There in ESIP, Adam chairs that, Adam Shepherd. And so what we did once, we had a sort of cross cluster working group for a particular marine data thing, where we brought in the marine data cluster, the semantics cluster, science on schema, right? And discovery, it's another cluster. And we just set up a sort of cross cluster project, time limited, to say, can we make some progress here? This is a use case for that. If you need that thing, you can say, hey, ESIP, can we set up a cross cluster working group to get this done? And can we use your coordination facilities? I'm sure they're quite amenable to that. They're quite a nice group. Yeah, and then you can tap into some other expertise that's there. Of course, hold your course. As I say, like when we're working right now, what we've done in this workshop, we've skipped right ahead to implementation phase. We're not theoretical anymore. This can go into working systems. But at the same time, if you need that sort of coordination, Lisa could provide it. I can facilitate too. I think Adam can also facilitate as the chair of the science and community.
All right, we're group 3 and we're really reiterating a lot of the things that have already been discussed. But we had sort of basically 4 main themes. We were a smaller group and we started talking a lot about funding sources. How are we funded across a lot of these different time series? European models are very different than American models to certain extents. The governments typically fund time series, so we talked a little bit about the different ways that these mechanisms are funded, especially for someone like myself who has a very small time series. And how could we talked about industry a little bit, we talked about hot topics, and how can we justify the importance of this type of data. and bringing that into the forefront and highlighting different areas of potential of sources of funding. I kept bringing up one of the mechanisms that we're gonna have to be starting to look at more in the United States is philanthropic sources of funding especially. We also talked a little bit about data formats or generating this metadata. I mean, I know some of these larger time series have worked on this quite extensively, but are there ways that we could help some of the smaller sort of one-offs or smaller groups that are out there to generate better metadata formats so that these can be brought into things such as Otis? Sebastian is a part of our group, and we talked a little bit about ODB as being something that's been used for a long period of time by a lot of different people to visualize data, but could this also be a way of bringing in data sets, but also exporting data so that you could actually generate or be prompted to generate the correct metadata formats that would be needed for something that you would implement into Otis, for example. Charlotte was a part of our group as well, and that's where she brought up some of the key issues with regarding metadata, and that we've already generated quite a few of these catalogs, and talked about interoperability of the metadata globally, and could we use some of these controlled vocabularies that have already been generated. Let's see, another topic that we talked about was outreach. We need to sort of highlight the importance of this. I mean, Charlotte talked about it yesterday with regard to sort of artist renditions, but, and I know this has been done across a few other time series as well, and I think some other groups have talked about this as well, but highlighting changes and how can we use these time series to really highlight what's going on and actually bringing the broader public and just generating broader interest of these things so that we actually could potentially generate more funding towards these. But how would we do this? I mean, how would we fund this, and who would be sort of instigators of this? And would philanthropic sources be a source of area, but maybe communicating between both communication specialists as well as artists to try to sort of bring general and more public exposure of these time series. And we ended on basically talking about data, and we're thinking about the methods portion of this week's activities, and sort of like what are some of the needs behind it. I mean, I know these sorts of work, but methodology and method comparisons in some cases have already been done across some of these larger time series, but getting the word out about how do we standardize some of the methodology that are being used across some of these time series. Is there a need for that? Is there ways of doing more precision and accuracy with some of the tools that we're using in these time series? So we sort of ended on sort of an off topic a little bit, but there's maybe a need that's associated with some of those. So this was sort of more data methods and comparisons. So overall, action items was, funding was a key one. How can we implement a better way of bringing in some of the smaller, in some cases, long time series. I mean, I'm part of this working group at ICES, and some of these time series have been ongoing, but they're not or the data is just not publicly available. So how do we encourage them to bring in and to make these data sets more available and bring them into things such as Otis, or we acknowledge that they actually exist? So I'm just trying to find, we were just really trying to find ways that we could do this in a more feasible manner, but ICOMETs or something like that, and those sorts of tools, we've already been able to expose some of that data, but how do we encourage them now to make that data more available? So, Sebastian, would you like to talk more about the ODB idea at all? Have you ever given more thoughts to that at all?
So I think this is more, let's say, the vision for ODB to be maybe somehow compatible with Otis and schema.org. And I've already discussed that briefly with Pierre Luigi prior to the meeting. And yeah, I think we keep that in mind, and we will see. And I think I also need to dive deeper into Otis and schema.org, which is quite useful. And I will try to understand it better and see if this is a way to do it. But it would be great if we could just read that megaphone.
as a starting point.
In that previous conversation, about ODB, it's again two-way. It's not that if there's a tool that's widely used in the oceanographic community and looking at the metadata that ODB consumes, if we can help with the ODIS specifications, say, look, if you want compatibility with this tool suite, please make sure you include these things in your schema.org. We're happy to do that, especially if that tool is in wide usage, because then people know, oh, great, all I have to do is add a few more properties, and then anyone with an ODB instance can detect my data set and use it right away, right? So we're happy to do that on our side too. It's not just, you wait for Otis to do something. You can shape it. You have that ability.
I just have a question for the group. I mean, we brought this up about having sort of data method comparisons, and I've been involved in them in terms of like phytoplankton identification across. I'm assuming this has been done also because I'm more of a phytoplankton and zooplankton person myself, but I was just curious how much of this has been done across time series and whether that's an important.
You know, it might be interesting if one of the LTR folks could talk about that, because I think that's one of the key drivers behind the LTR system, right? That they do cross-site.
I was going to say, one of the, one of, I think, LTR's successes is that it has managed to do synthesis and things like that without actually ever being terribly well organized with respect to coordinating measurements and those sorts of things. It's for instance, for one thing, if you're talking about primary production, what method do you use to measure primary production offshore and also in an old growth forest? So often what it is there are clusters of LTR sites that have maybe similar ecosystems and things like that. So the grassland sites have had times where they got together and did some synthesis stuff, and the forest sites got together, and some of the marine sites got together. But there is not sort of, if you want to look for a place where there truly is uniformity of measurements, then you need to look at NEON. And NEON's a totally different beast. It's one that they have their suite of measurements and they measure the exact same things every place they are. But they're also fairly restricted in terms of, there are no offshore NEON things. But the thing, I guess the point I would make there is that having some variety, having some need to make harmonization between data does not rule out the ability to do it. Okay, and there also have been some times where there were cross-site experiments, where literally it was all the sites did the same thing that were participating because a protocol was set out and people followed that protocol to do it. But that's not sort of a normal thing for the day-to-day collection.
Can you comment on, they all have are they required, or they all have their 5?
They have the core areas, so everybody's collecting data on primary production, everybody's collecting data on nutrient movements, and organic matter, and disturbance. So all of those are there, but those are a fairly broad, a broad thing, but given the diversity of systems, it would be hard to really be otherwise about it.
Yeah.
It's the drive to do everything exactly the same way comes with a lot of costs in terms of getting that front end agreement. And the thing is that also we're doing science. I mean, in some areas, we know what good methodology is. Like the LTR years ago put out a book of standard methods for soils that they recommended that sites use. That was because they felt those methods were mature enough. But there's lots of other things that we're doing that may not be sort of ready for that type of consolidation in terms of methodology. So in that case, what you see are sort of a diversity of approaches, and then as they tend to win out, people tend to sort of move towards them. An important aspect to it is the communication part of it. If you know what somebody else is doing and you see that they're getting good results out of it, then you're more likely to do it yourself. But it's my sense is it's really difficult to get everybody to sit down and agree right from the beginning
about how you're gonna do something. But an example, I'm a small mammal guy, so I'll throw in one example. The International Biological Program had a codified way of sampling small mammals. It was called the Calhoun trap line. And what it consisted of putting out a bunch of snap traps, which are kill traps, in a certain pattern, in a certain place. No right-thinking mammologist or ecologist would even condone doing anything like that today. We've moved to live traps, now we're moving more to camera trapping. So it's, you know, if we locked into that one way, we would have missed a lot of boats. But at the same time, looking for those places where you can, I won't say collect identical data, but connect data that can be harmonized together is a big thing there. I don't want to, I won't say we mastered the secret of it. This is always a sense of tension within the LPR network in terms of, you know, standardization versus innovation is always there. Anyway, I'm rambling on, I could ramble on about LPR all day, but is that at all helpful?
No, I think that what you touched on was the coordination across the sites that allows that to happen. Not necessarily that everybody needs to standardize, although it sounds like we made progress on the editing of the recommendations for methods. So there's something that people can come to if they so choose. It was more of the providing the framework for people to get together to find these commonalities. And I appreciate that LTR is one funder, one system in the US, and this is distributed across, you know, the globe. So there are gonna be driver differences for why people started their time series and their own national requirements for what they collect and how they report. But providing the framework for people to talk to each other to see if there are potential collaboration efforts or what those low-hanging fruit synthesis products are or cross-site projects, you know, something like metering spot that, you know, might come out of that.
Yeah, LPR has not required uniformity in like site specific data. I mean, within the site data systems. It kind of astonishes me sometimes, but also has allowed people to have creativity in developing their systems. On the other hand, they have always emphasized synthesis science and have explicitly funded that.
Right.
My point was just a point about standardization, etc. And my point has always been the same from an ecological perspective. Let's not forget always that trends and changes, relative changes, can be as telling as absolute values. So even if data are not standardized, the comparisons between relative changes when we are trying to discern ecological processes are extremely valuable. So that was the only point that I was trying to make.
Well, I think it's very clear that over time, the time series are being asked to show value to the public in many ways. And it's certainly, since it's very hard to come up with ideas to show that in a monetary sense or in education or outreach activities. So I think it would be really useful. This is a really rich and large group. And there are plenty of experiences that I've heard in this meeting and meetings before where people are being really creative about how they incorporate citizen science activities into their time series efforts. And I think for this group, it would be really valuable to start documenting those, cataloging, even to the highest level of detail so that others can replicate that effort. I would be very interested in learning how Munida is bringing people on their expeditions and what they do, what are the shed. That's something that we can do in our time series. And that this is especially important at least in the US, in the current circumstances, it's really critical to show, for the educational citizen science point of view, how we are contributing to people's well-being.
Thank you, Nicole. We have our final group 4.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marguerite Blum. Yes, Carla has just passed the baton or the microphone as we now have in my hand. So pretty much group 4 is in total agreement with all the other groups. We don't have too much to add. I already, spoke up in group 1 where are we a data liaison or a data broker, which is like terminology that as a younger person in this situation may have just no knowledge of. So finding out who we can figure out to be the person that can be like maybe somebody from Otis talking to the Monterey Bay Time Series people, where we have data programmers and the people that are in charge of all of our huge databases at Bari. We now have to change over and upload to the system. We have the money to do it, we could make it happen, but then as a larger group that's well funded, we need to go talk to Carla and make sure that she can get her data also put up into the system. So whatever we call that person, liaison, broker, whatever, I think that's very important. So what we started in our group, I mean, we've all been talking about this, like, what are the future pathways coming from this meeting? How are we gonna go forward and integrate all the time series into a large database? The metadata templates, how do they support the fair practices that we've been talking about this entire time? What is that path to gain consistent pathways, so that going back to the data broker, you gotta get those pathways, solidified so that we can go to the next person and be like, hey, it's not that difficult, we can do this. Metadata, always the metadata, has to be in one location. Because if you don't know how you did it, you don't know how you can fix it. So we were saying that if you have the large database, and you need to get that DOI to talk about, pinpoint that data. We're saying maybe every 6 months needs a new DOI. Well, BTC Argo is already doing that. They have a new DOI every single month for the data that they collect and put out there for everyone to use. So it's happening. It's not scary. You can do it. So yeah, it makes happen. So the continuity with upcoming generations. So let's integrate the new people that are just coming out of grad school and postdocs. Let's make them do it. We're busy. We know what we're doing and we're doing it. These guys are learning to do it. Let's get them to figure out how to do those pathways and help us integrate it into the system. Because I know none of us are bored. They might be bored. They're playing their little things on their phone, blah, blah, blah. No, let them program everything. They know what's going on better than we do half the time. That Gen Z, we're bored. What else to say? Yeah, the training people. So we got to train ourselves. We have to train that kind of generation. Train them. And then what are we doing with the databases as our parents retire and they go away? The younger generation now has to take over these long time series. Let's make sure that they are being fair in their practices. Like they need to know how to upload it to the database. They also need to share with others. We gotta do this to make it happen. We don't want this depreciation of value, right? These are our babies. We've been working on them for a long time. They need to go somewhere. They need to grow. Also, like if we have problems uploading our data, it's a mature time series, right? The mature time series, we've got all the data. We should be able to figure out how to load it up. And then the younger time series have an easier time going, oh, no, we've already figured this out. What are your questions? No, you're fine. Got you. So I want to add that into like Spots and Otis is a really good starting point. Like they're working really hard to figure out how to get all the data and put it together. We're all doing this together right now. Yeah, so that data broker, liaison, whatever we're gonna call them. I really do think that's important. It's hard to be in your little office with, all of that schema.org
vocabulary, and you're freaking out in your little office, and somebody on the phone calls and says, no, it's okay, we'll have to do this, it's okay, liaison. What is it, Carl, anything? Okay, so the reality of a time series, like, we got it going, we have some mature time series, we have new time series, how long will they last? How long will, like I said about the parents, what happens when they're not there anymore? What happens to your babies once you retire? Yeah, asking for the data is easy. I mean, we've got Kara here, we've got Nico, they're like, yeah, we want the data. And then now we're going over here going, but we've been cultivating this for so long. What are we gonna do with it? What are you guys gonna do with it? Where were we? Okay. Okay, and then how to reach out. So everybody wants the data. And how do you reach out to those vast databases hiding in a computer somewhere? Well, I know my group, when we're working with the MBOD data, all that eDNA, the gigabytes and gigabytes of crunched data that you have to put together into some lovely little graph format. Well, hackathons have been amazing. If you get a bunch of people together to figure out the vocabulary and how to, process the data, then they're also interested in getting all of that into a repository. So how do you upload that to a repository? Well, ODB makes it really easy for you to upload your data and play with your data and make pretty graphs. What if, when you're done making that graph, ODB is like, hey, that looks great. Would you like to share that with a community of other people, like-minded people? Maybe ODB just needs to be like, here's a little email. I know somebody said, don't send out emails, you can delete those really easily. But if you've got an undergrad or a postdoc who's like, wait a minute, there's more out there than what I just did. Sure, I'll share my data if I can get more data back. It's an incentive. Could work. I'll let you, all the brains figure that one out. Oh, we also talked about data gaps. So Carla did that beautiful representation of art for her time series. And they were broken pieces in there where months were missing. And like with my work, we're trying to figure out how, if we don't get out on a ship, can we go with the gliders? Can we go with autonomous vehicles? How do you fill in all those gaps? And those gaps are there because we want to control like a noise. Maybe it's a quality control noise. Maybe it's just like a seasonal gap that we're missing. If you upload all your data, somebody that you didn't know about might be able to fill in those gaps, just happenstance. You never know. So how much can you massage the data before it becomes overly manipulated also? Because once you load it up, you don't want it to be so simplified that you're not getting like a sense of seasonality or yearly trends or decadal observations. So we just have to be sure that the noise gaps are filled in, but we're not overly manipulating the data. And do we need to develop a QC tool? Yes. DGC Argo has a great example of, you got raw data, you got one filter, and then you've got a second filter. And it starts to look great, but gotta use those QC tools, but not overly use them. Okay, and then of course, what is a QC? We have to figure out what a QC is. I mean, a lot of us have been talking about 1 through 4. And I know I use 1 through 4 a lot. And are we going to remove the bad data as number 4, not upload it, or should we upload it? That's a question. Let's do that experience. And of course, document everything. Document, metadata, documentation. Big letters. We also went through the the example of Todd's Ignatz and Platt. He's got this huge database, and that database gives you beautiful graphs about what was going on in that area. He could use more data. He wants more data. Let's give him more data. And then Spots and Otis and everybody can all share within that, and it's a good community. And then how can we get the survey across the time series who's willing to join Spots? So how do you get people to join it? Or make, how do you get a survey across the time series of who's willing to join Spots? So we want everyone to know what's going on. We need Spots to have a bigger presence. So like, I work with a nonprofit foundation that works with veterans, so this is completely outside of all this. We have committees, we have chair people, we have presidents, you know, so can we get Spots to have committee people? And then those committee people can go, where are we gonna go find funding? And then you get the, keep going back to broker liaison services. And then they can all talk about the QC manipulation, and they can figure out where to go find funding. If everybody has an idea, we can go find funding. And funding is a big deal. You can't just sit in your office and not get paid to upload data. So where can we go find funding? NSF, Ocean Quest, which is Carla brought this up. This is
It's a new organization.
it's a new organization out of the Arabic Peninsula, and we got money. And it's like we can go and get little spots of money from people. I mentioned Google, but everyone's so maybe not Google. GMR. So yeah, it's like, how do you get all of that to, you know, get people to give you money? Yeah, we not only do we need a data liaison, we need a grant writer and somebody go out there and say, hey, you got some money, I'll take it, do something cool with it. All right, and then, yeah, encouraging people to upload to the public repositories. ODB, I thought Web ODB does a great job, and if people load it up, they should be able to, like, they're already doing it. And so now it's in a processed data format that you can use to make graphs. It's already loaded. It's like, the next step is to just go, yes, here you go. Easy. So I don't think this is difficult. When I came in here, I thought it was difficult. I don't think it's difficult anymore. And that's like it. So, sorry, I'm fast. We're the last group, yay! Carla and I definitely want to do our installation with all of our time series. So we'll get back to you about that, because I like pretty art when we're good. No data, just art.
One thing that would be so many times, so now I think I'm all for groups, the state liaison idea. On meeting to all this ignorance spots, I think, especially when we talk about different spots, maybe Carla should come together and then try to collaborate somewhere or another. I mean, maybe spots can become a sub part of ignorance, in the sense of data that you want to share can be shared to spots, for example. So that then people we approach another approach 3 times, one time to orders, one time to ignorance, one time to spots, but because we're in that sense all trying to achieve the same thing. Yeah, that's the idea. Through that data liaison that then goes to all these individual sites and helps them to get the metadata in the correct format, and discuss the next steps, either events or spots, but again, in a collaboration rather than in a competition.
I did forget to mention one thing that I thought about while we were sitting around is also the traveling technician idea. Kind of like you have traveling nurses, but you have a traveling technician that kind of knows how to manipulate your data if you're in the wrong units. Sounded like something I'd want to do 20 years ago. It's like, oh, I'm just gonna travel around and play with data. It's fun.